what we decided to do in our department is that we're going to cover the next couple chapters. We're going to provide the summaries for you because there are things that we want you to know, but we also want to get to kind of like the main storyline that we're going to be approaching in like chapters 9, 10, 11. That's right at the end of part 1. So today I'm going to be presenting to you some quick summaries on chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. So kind of progressing through different times of their lives as they kind of, as Scout gets a little bit older, right? And once we get to part 2 is going to focus really heavily on like one sort of like 4-month stretch of her life. It's not going to keep jumping a year later and a year later. So let me just kind of pull this up here and then we'll go through it. I'll try to make it as quick as possible to cover up what I think you need to know, right? So first of all, chapter 5. So the main things are that right now, Scout is spending most of her time with Miss Maudie Atkinson because the boys sort of, they keep leaving her behind, right? So Dill and Jem don't really want to play around with Scout as much. So she's hanging around with Miss Maudie a lot more because she doesn't really have much to do. Miss Maudie tells Scout more about the Radleys. She kind of gives her a different perspective, which is important because Miss Maudie is a lot like Atticus, where she's a little more truthful to the kids as opposed to like some people who sometimes talk down to kids. You know how that is, where it's kind of annoying and they maybe don't think that you can handle it. Or you have Miss Stephanie, who's just this terrible gossip who just makes up everything and is like, you can't really trust a word that comes out of her mouth. Miss Maudie does mention that Boo's father was what she called a foot-washing Baptist, meaning that basically he was so religious that he thought that anything that you did in life that you enjoyed was a sin, because clearly any sort of enjoyment in life is a sin. Like that was his approach. So just really strict, which would also explain then how he locked up Boo for so many years after Boo got in trouble that we read about in chapter 1. He mentions that Miss Maudie and her flowers are probably going to hell because she really enjoys growing those flowers. So something as innocent as growing flowers around your house, Mr. Radley thought was a sin because you were not focusing your time on worshiping the Lord, basically. And then she makes a comment about how if Boo wasn't crazy when he went in there, he probably is now. So she's like, if Boo wasn't crazy, like when that all happened when he was 18, being stuck at home with his dad for as long as he was probably kind of pushed him over the edge. Scout then finds out that Jem and Dill are planning to use a fishing pole to put a note to Boo through a window. They're going to try to like hang it into like one of the window shutters at the Radley house to communicate with them. They just want to sort of reach out and make contact with them. With this, like the note is simply just inviting him out for ice cream. Like it's just very innocent, but again, they're kind of going over that line where Atticus said, leave the Radleys alone, and they're proceeding to not leave him alone. So some complications arise during this when Atticus shows up. He's not happy because they're not listening to him. So Atticus tells them to stop playing their stupid game, playing Boo Radley as they've been doing. Jem says they weren't making fun of Boo, but in the process of saying that they weren't making fun of Boo, he's confirmed Atticus's suspicions that they are playing a game about the Radleys. So Atticus sort of lawyered him, I guess you could say. And Jem doesn't really like that. So he's kind of mad at Atticus at the end of the chapter. So that's where they are. They're still sort of drawn into that or seeing this divide kind of build between Jem and Dill and Scout because they're like, she's a girl, you gross cooties, all that stuff, right? Chapter 6. So Jem and Dill decide that they're going to look through a window at the Radley house just to get a peekaboo. Now they're not even trying to invite him out. They just want to be able to see him, right? Like, let's see, are all these things that we heard about him true? Is he 6'6"? Does he have that big scar? Are his hands stained with blood because he eats raw squirrels and all that stuff that we heard in chapter 1, right? Scout doesn't want to do it. She thinks that it's dangerous and that they would be going against what Atticus said. And they're like, well, if you're too much of a girl, you can stay home, which is basically like a way to make sure that she comes along because she's like, I'm not a girl. She takes it as an insult. While Jim's looking through the window, though, they see this shadowy figure sort of come over the top of him and they get kind of scared, right? I mean, for good reason, because they're doing this at night too. So terrified, they run away. As they run away, they hear gunshots. Now they're really terrified and they try to get under a fence. While they're getting under a fence, Scout and Dill get under very easily, but Jem gets caught. Right, it gets caught on his pants, so he like takes his pants off and shimmies out of them and gets away because right now they're just trying not to get shot. And then when they get around to like the main road, they see a group of people kind of gathering in front of the Radley house, and they notice Miss Maudie's there, Atticus is there, like all the people that they know from their neighborhood. Miss Maudie says that there was a gunshot because Mr. Radley shot in the air to scare off an intruder. So he thought someone was trying to break in, so he didn't shoot to kill, but he says next time he will. Atticus then astutely notices that Jem's not wearing pants. To cover for this, Dill says that they were playing strip poker, which is a weird thing to do, because he knows that even though like playing poker and gambling would be something that Atticus would frown upon, it would be better than them again going after the Radleys. So Atticus tells him, "Well, just get your pants back before Dill leaves tomorrow." But that creates a problem because Dill doesn't have those pants. So Jem and Scout can't sleep because they're worried about this. Jem decides to go back to get his pants because he can't let Atticus know the truth, that they were disobeying him yet again. He makes a comment about how, you know, I've never really done anything that makes Atticus want to discipline me, and I don't want that to start now. And eventually, like, it seems like it's forever, but Scout then realizes, you know, Jem comes back and he holds his pants up in sort of like a sort of victory sort of way, right? You know, like mission accomplished. But that's how the chapter ends. Again, he doesn't say much about it, just kind of comes back. Pretty terrifying night for the kids. Chapter 7. So chapter 7, Jem tells Scout that when he went back to the Radley house to get his pants, they weren't all tangled up in the fence like they were when he took them off. Like, that's why he took them off. Instead, he found them, they were folded and like laying across the fence, and they were even sewn up where they sort of got caught on the fence, but not well. Like, it was almost like if I was sewing them up. Like, I can't sew, it's not a skill I have. It was like if I tried. So he said he notices that, and he didn't tell her initially. So as they're walking home from school one day, that knot hole where they found the stuff in earlier in chapter 4, they find some more stuff, right? So they find a ball of gray twine, which, again, like anything that they can find is sort of interesting and it's exciting. And so they, again, start to wonder, like, well, who would be leaving stuff in here? You know, like, not a lot of people come by this way. Like, this is sort of our neighborhood. Like, we're really curious about this. Another time then, Jem and Scout actually find 2 small figures that are carved in soap, and those figures look a lot like Jem. They notice that like it's got like Jem and Scout's haircuts, like each one. So it's almost like they're modeled after the 2 kids. Over the next few weeks, they find a whole package of chewing gum, which is a big deal. I mean, you guys know how it is. If someone has gum at school, like, everyone, you know, flocks to them like vultures. They find a spelling bee medal that was from before they were even born, and a pocket watch that won't run. But Jem then sort of like takes this interest in that watch, and he tries to fix it around. He carries it around and stuff like that. And it's all in that same knot hole. And so they get more and more curious, but they enjoy it. You know, it's kind of like this fun game. And then one day on their way to school, they see that the knot hole has been filled up with cement. So there's no knot hole there anymore. And they're a little upset about it because, I mean, like I said, that was a fun thing that they looked forward to a lot. So later that day, Jem waits to be able to, when Mr. Radley's Mr. Nathan Radley, sorry, is on his way back from town, Jem waits to ask him why he did that. And Mr. Nathan Radley said that the tree was dying, and that's what you do to a dead tree to kind of stop that disease from going, I guess you could say. Jem asks Atticus if that tree's dying, and Atticus is like, it looks healthy to me. And then when Jem says, well, Mr. Nathan Radley said it's dying, Atticus again kind of sticks with that let's leave them alone mantra by saying, well, it's his tree. He probably knows better than I do. And at the end of the chapter, Jem starts to cry, and Scout doesn't really understand why. And we're going to see that as the next few chapters, Jem is just starting to deal with some realizations about the world that he's really struggling with. And Scout isn't quite there yet. You know, it's sort of like when you're a kid and like your older sibling starts to mature, you don't quite get it. That's where Scout is right now. She doesn't quite understand why Jem is so bothered by this. And the last one for this video, chapter 8. So in chapter 8, Maycomb has its coldest winter in decades, since like the late 1800s. In fact, one day they wake up and it's snowing, which we're in Wisconsin, so that's not a big deal. But in Maycomb, Alabama, it is a huge deal. They even get a call from like the local operator saying that because this is the first time that it has snowed in like, you know, decades, school is canceled. And this is like a dusting of snow. This is something that we wouldn't even consider a 2-hour delay for us. But school's canceled for them, and they're super excited. They don't even know how to handle this. They want to play in the snow because it hasn't snowed in their lifetime, but there's not much there. So they end up taking like laundry basket and going over to Miss Maudie's yard, because she's like, go ahead, take all the snow. It's going to kill my flowers. It's going to kill all these things that I really like working on. So take it all away. So they do this, but they still don't necessarily have enough snow to even build a snowman. So Jem builds a snowman out of mud first and then covers it in snow. you know, kind of showing his creativity, and you know, they're just trying to enjoy it. Like, think about when you're a little kid and you play in the snow. Like, they are so pumped about this. So because it doesn't just warm up the next day, that night is terribly cold. And so everyone sort of has fireplaces burning overnight because they don't have central heat or anything like that to keep the homes heated. And then in the middle of the night, Jem and Scout wake up and discover that Miss Maudie's house is burning down, right? It's on fire because she left her stove on as well, like a lot of people did, to keep her house warm, to keep some of her plants alive. And they see that the entire town has basically come out to try to help fight the fire. Atticus kind of remains calm the entire time. And Jem even tells Scout, like, hey, we don't need to worry yet, because she's kind of following his father's lead, even as it sort of seems like it might be getting closer to their house. But the fire gets put out. The next morning, then, Atticus notices that Scout has a blanket that's not theirs wrapped around her shoulders. She doesn't even know where it came from. And then Atticus figures out that he says something like, apparently the whole town must have been up last night, including someone who doesn't really come out very often. So he alludes to the fact that Boo Radley probably saw that she was cold and wrapped a blanket around her, but she was so distracted by the fire, didn't even notice that he was right behind them. Like, if she had turned and looked over her shoulder, she might have gotten a peek at Boo Radley. So then they talk to Miss Maudie later that day, and she seems really upbeat and positive. She's like, you know what, my house is too big anyway. I'll rebuild, and I'm going to have like the best landscaping and the prettiest flowers, you know, in Alabama. You know, she's just really positive, even though she's just lost everything. And she said she's going to live with Miss Stephanie for the time being. So even in the wake of this tragedy, she is just like, that's okay. We'll rebuild. We'll be able to make it better. So that goes through those 4 chapters, right? In the next couple chapters, we'll have one more summary, and then you're gonna be reading 2 of the chapters in part 1, because we're gonna be getting to like the next, like the big sort of storyline that brings everything together in this book, which is a case that Atticus has to work as a lawyer. Other than that, enjoy the weekend. I will talk to you all real soon, and you know, take care.